The leadership reckoning that you're talking about, that you've written about, could you talk about the process of having arrived at that reckoning and then how that's really manifesting itself in terms of scaling this across 1,000 universities?
Right, sure. It's a great story. I mean, we've got a partnership with someone who already has the scale. So the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching already classifies every college and university in the US, Canada, and Australia. And so we have a partnership to create an optional classification through them in leadership education and development. So we'll hit by next year, we'll impact 4,500 schools.
That's incredible. And this has been based on the research that you've been incubating. Tell me a little bit about the Institute that led into this next step that you've taken.
Sure. Well, John Doerr just charged me with starting from scratch and with no constraints. What would the best university leader development program look like? And so I built it here. And we offer every student in the school who wants it a professional leadership coach for 3 months. And a host of other things, 17 other things. And it's all optional, but we have 40% of the university student body involved. And I have HROs who are asking for direct pipelines of employees from our institute into their oil companies, for example, because they know they don't have to train them as junior leaders. They can start them a lot faster. And so job one was to build it at Rice and do the research to show that it's real growth, real development. And then to figure out how to impact the rest of the world with it. I mean, John Doerr, he's like big idea guy, and
right.
And so that's where the Carnegie Foundation comes in. That's why we're going to impact 4,500 schools. The problem with most people is that they have big ideas, but no way to leverage them into execution. And if there's one thing that John Doerr has beat into my head that would also apply to those prospective CEOs, ideas are easy, execution is everything. That's John Doerr. It's not about having the best idea if you can't execute. And we spend 75% of our time on execution here.
Think about the different dimensions of that later stage in your career. What would be your shorter list of areas for the leader to focus on then? This idea of execution has many things to unpack, and certainly something that you've seen at scale, even going all the way back to your days in the military and everything that you've done in academic institutions and now in organizational and business contexts. I can't think of anybody who's had a greater breadth of opportunities to execute at great scale or screw it up. What would you say is your shorter list for the more senior leaders that you've found they've missed?
Well, I think my short list for people at that level would be 3 things. So first of all, the higher you go, the more decision processes are driven by intuition rather than immutable data provided by MBAs. And consequently, you have to learn to live with your gut. You have to learn to, make judgments as opposed to simply reviewing data and letting the data decide for you. So that's really, the first critical thing that I think sets people apart. The second is a level of humility. One of the things I learned in the military was the more rank you have, the less you need to use it. It's the same thing in business. The more authority you have, the more careful you have to be about leading through that authority rather than leading with your influence and your inspiration and trust and all those interpersonal things that make for, really great leaders. And then I think the third thing that's really critical at that level is that you have to understand the world as it is, not as you'd like it to be. There's a tendency when people come with big ideas that they're very excited about that. They want the world to be the way they want it to be. But the judgment required of a more senior person requires that that individual see the world in a very realistic sense. I mean, it's called reality testing as an emotional intelligence variable. And so
Right.
it's very key that that you don't stretch your aspirations into a world that doesn't exist and then make your decisions in that non-existent world. You know, you have to be in in concrete touch with reality. And that requires some courage. It requires a tremendous amount of intellectual honesty. And there's so much spin in our world these days, you know, that finding people who are solidly grounded in intellectual honesty is kind of difficult sometimes.
Mm.
But it's
When I think
essential.
it's so essential, I think about the many realities that you've had to face throughout your career, and I'm going to share with everybody that in addition to your many other talents, you were jumping out of airplanes filming the team as it would compete, and I think it was at West Point, right, in the aerial acrobatics and so forth. And I imagine that reality check would be something that one would have to get right, from the checklist manifesto to also testing your own talents in terms of that context of jumping out of airplanes.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings I got from a former chief of staff of the Army named Gordon Sullivan, and he wrote a book by this title. And the saying is, "Hope is not a method." And so, you know, in elite business or in dangerous contexts, you cannot afford to hope your way through problems, decisions, what have you. You know, deal with the world the way it is. And you know, there were many times, just talking about the parachuting, there were many times when I would pack my parachute and I would walk away from it and I would think back about, you know, did I attend to this little detail? And every single time I pulled that parachute out and repacked it. I never hoped that I got that detail right. I took the 15 minutes to redo the whole thing. And in business, in elite business, where there are significant consequences to decisions, you cannot afford to hope your way through. And the really tricky part is some people do that and get lucky.
Mm-hmm.
If they do it and they get lucky, they tend to do it again. And they do it again. And they may get away with it half a dozen times, and then bang, you know, they get hit with it. And
I can't help but ask you, did you notice or did you not notice whether you'd gotten it right every time?
No,
or could you tell?
I noticed, and about a third of the time I'd gotten something wrong and I could have done better. And so I did better. And I tried to work that into the development of younger jumpers. So when I would see them taking a shortcut or doing something that was ill-advised with their equipment, I wouldn't go up to them and implore them to fix it. I'd look at them and I'd say, keep doing that. Keep doing that. And you'll see why you shouldn't be. And it was much more impactful to them than if I'd have shaken my finger at them and told them to do something differently. You know, it was about putting them in charge of their own destiny. And that's really key.
It's so interesting how people who are the highest achievers, who have impacted the most, how much so many still struggle. So how much all of us struggle with having agency over the outcomes and not letting the ego or the complacency take over where it might unnecessarily unravel our plans in terms of the fact that we have agency to do it again. Let's maybe do that. Maybe that's why we call it a practice when we're doing surgery or when we're performing in some other way. When you think about the experience of working with someone as iconic as John Doerr, who really built Silicon Valley in one of the as one of the iconic figures really of financing it at a time when it wasn't so hip to think that way, going back 3 decades. I was here in the Valley at the time and could see what was evolving out of Stanford and Berkeley and elsewhere. And his ambitions and his life evolved so that he would have impact on some of the major brands that we know today. Tell me about how it is to work with a leader like that. He probably has a very high self-concept. He probably has very many great demands that he's been making. You've also had a great career as well. Talk to me about that collaboration.
You know, one of the things that has always impressed me about John Doerr is that he has a humble respect for the expertise of other people. So I came out of Yale and I was talking to him in his office. It was an interview for this job pretty much. And I asked him, I said, well, what's your vision for the Doerr Institute for New Leaders? And he looked at me and he said, you know a lot more about this than I do. I don't really have a vision. You know, my vision is to hire you and have you get it done. And, you know, leadership is the kind of field where there are a lot of people who sort of take amateurish swipes at it. You know, they think that it's intuitive enough that they can just make things up. And, you know, John Doerr is not like that. He doesn't make things up. He doesn't impress his own influence in areas where he's not the expert. I mean, you know, Alan Mullally's great quote about, if I'm not the expert, why am I talking? And I see that same characteristic in John Doerr. He is a listener. I mean, he focuses on people, he listens. I think he listens with really positive intent. You know, he's not trying to trip you up. If he doesn't understand something or he doesn't quite see the mechanism, he'll just ask a very straightforward and pointed question about that. And then beyond that, you know, he leaves his people alone. He hires people to get the job done, and then he leaves them alone.
And then he's famously known for the KPIs so that you can form those objectives that roll up into the mutually beneficial outcomes and have a measurement system that in a very real sense, you're holding yourself accountable and maybe doing it occasionally in his presence.
Exactly. You know, the objectives and key results framework has been really one of his gifts. I mean, he wrote Measure What Matters in a purely altruistic sense, in helping people to better understand how to achieve their goals. And consequently, when we built the Doerr Institute at Rice around leader development, we created the conditions where we would do nothing without having objective outcome measurement. Not process measurement, which is how popular was it? Did the kids like it? Did they come? But what were the psychological variables that they changed on? You know, measured, validated psychological variables that we can point to and say, see, this is where the intervention was. And this caused them to seek out more leadership roles. We left none of that to assumption. It is 100% measured. And it's made all the difference in allowing us to be accepted by university faculty who have a very low tolerance, as you might expect, for fuzzy, fluffy leadership.
Ungrounded assertions, yes, right. Indeed.
We call leadertainment.
I like it. I like it. We'll do that next time. You and I could get on the dance floor together. But I think we'll want to keep our day jobs for sure. I tried that a couple of times. The process of working with having impact on the community of people doing the actual work and your teammates are two levels of that interaction in leadership. Another that I imagine is massive for you, and it certainly is for John as well, and that is this ecosystem of the stakeholders and, let's say, maybe the board of directors or a board of trustees. Could you tell me what you wish you knew about working with boards or communities of those who have influence and they have responsibility and are holding you accountable for outcomes? What would be some coaching takeaways that you have from now a lifetime of interacting with many different communities? You've had those that are academically related, military, now in the for-profit and nonprofit world.
Sure. So as we scale, the principal people that I talk to are university presidents and university boards of trustees. And I have really enjoyed those interactions because boards of trustees are generally populated by accomplished, successful leaders who want things to go well and have a healthy dose of skepticism around academe. You know, they're not professors for the most part. They're business people. And yet they have a fondness for education and for the management of universities. So like most boards, they want the facts up front and they want them fast. So I don't think I've ever talked to a board for more than about 20 minutes. And it's always been very impactful. You know, they can make decisions in 15 to 20 minutes that it would take months of committee work at a university to accomplish. And most of it has to do with very simple aspects of performance. What are your goals? How do you intend to get there? What are your metrics for success thus far? And how much is it going to cost? And that's true for almost any organization. It's very standard and straightforward. And we use 4 fundamental principles to build the Doerr Institute that I really believe apply in all organizations. And they're quite simple. The first is that we require the organization, a university in this case, to view leader development as a core function. So if the organization doesn't care about leader development, you might as well just stop and use your money elsewhere. The second is that we only use evidence-based techniques. As you know, the leadership field is full of a lot of stuff that doesn't really work. You know, it sells, but it's not impactful. And so we make sure that it's been done well before and it was successful. The third thing we do is we only use professional people. So often when pursuing leadership kinds of things or other aspects of business, people will pick amateurs. I mean, they will pick people fully developed, but they know them from somewhere else, or they're already in the organization, so maybe they can take on that role. And we don't do that. We hire full-on professional leader developers as vendors, and it's far less expensive than trying to work with existing professors or something like that. And then lastly, and this is the Doerr influence, we measure outcomes objectively and ruthlessly. I mean, no one who runs a program measures their own outcomes. We have an independent measurement team, and that allows us to deal with the world as it is, not how we'd like it to be. And that, I think, has been the key for a lot of progress for us, is just being honest with ourselves. We find that in many organizations, when it comes to leader development, if you stop doing the things that don't really produce, there's plenty of money left over for the things that do.
Getting us beyond that wishful thinking down to what actually makes a difference, and then focusing all the effort there. You've been a real gift to the field of leadership, Tom, a real mentor for me and so many people whose lives you touched, because you've helped us get real with ourselves, helped us think about how we can develop ourselves and lead ourselves into that next step of our growth. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you about the leadership reckoning and this concept of being able to develop a culture around execution and getting stuff done. So I admire you so much. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Mark, I treasure every minute I spend with you. I'm really grateful to be able to talk to you here today.